Today on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, I interview Chris Martin, the author of the new book, Terms of Service, and we talk about being a believer in a world of social media. And we'll get to all of that right after this. 2022 is flying by so fast, and I just reviewed my goals for the year. It's not too late to set some effective goals for 2022 for yourself. And the Goal Process 101 ebook helps you do just that. With a straightforward process and practical exercises, you'll be guided to set the right goals for you and set out a plan to achieve them. Get your copy of the Goal Process 101 ebook by going to goalprocess101.com. Use CNU2022 at checkout to save 10%. Now, back to the show. Before we get to our interview, let's start with some scripture. Let's start with Mark 16, 14 through 16. Later, Jesus appeared to the 11 as they were eating. He rebuked them for their lack of faith and their stubborn refusal to believe those who had seen him after he had risen. He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned." And Acts 15, 7 through 9. After much discussion, Peter got up and addressed them. "Brothers, you know that some time ago God made a choice among you that the Gentiles might hear from my lips the message of the gospel and believe. God, who knows the heart, showed that he accepted them by giving the Holy Spirit to them, just as he did to us. He did not discriminate between us and them, for he purified their hearts by faith." Today's technology is amazing, and social media is a big part of that right now. I have a friend that I work closely with, and we serve as digital missions trainers. And he and I agree, with the technology of today, it could be in our lifetime or in the lifetime of our children that the gospel is literally shared to every tongue, tribe, and nation. And with that thought in mind, today's guest, Chris Martin, has led social media strategy at Lifeway Christian Resources, advised some of the foremost Christian leaders and authors on digital content strategy, and is currently a content marketing editor at Moody Publishers. And today we talk to him about his new book, Terms of Service, The Real Cost of Social Media. We talk about the bad and the good of social media and explore what we think its highest and best use could be. Let's get right into our interview. Chris, it is so great to have you on the podcast today. I just want to welcome you to Christian Nerds Unite. And so tell us just a little bit about who Chris Martin is.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Chris. I'm originally from Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is up in the northeast part of Indiana there. And I went to Taylor University for my undergrad. I have an undergraduate degree in biblical literature. My wife and I both went to Taylor. We've known each other since we were in the 8th grade. And we graduated from Taylor in 2013. And I got a job at Lifeway Christian Resources, which led us to move down to the Nashville area, which is where we live currently. I worked at Lifeway Christian Resources for about 7 years in a handful, almost exactly 7 years, actually, down to the day. And I worked in a handful of different roles when I was at Lifeway, all of them related to digital content in some way. So though I have an undergraduate degree in Bible and a master's of divinity, I have a ton of experience in creating online content. My dad worked for IBM when I was growing up, so I was around computers and technology much earlier in the early 1990s than a lot of my friends were. And so I've just always really been interested in the internet and computers and all of that sort of thing. And I remember I worked for the school newspaper in high school and had like a tech column. And I remember like reviewing the first iPhone when it came out in 2007 when I was a junior in high school. And so I've just always been interested kind of in the intersection of writing, social media, and creating content online. And then obviously when I got my Bible degree, I became very interested in creating Christian content for the internet, both for social media and like longer form content such as blogs or videos and otherwise. And so I worked for about 7 years at Lifeway, doing different roles, doing all of that kind of thing. Eventually, my final role at Lifeway was head of social media. So I I created the content for the main Lifeway Christian Resources social media handles, and then oversaw the roughly 60 people who ran social media accounts at Lifeway. We had about 270 when we still had the stores open back then. And so a lot of my work was shutting a handful of those down because we had far too many. And so that's kind of my background from a technical standpoint. Around 2017, 2018, I became very interested in writing about kind of the philosophical underpinnings of social media. You know, I work in social media my whole career. Even to today, I work for Moody Publishers now, not Lifeway, and I run a website called Bible to Life, which does exactly what we've talked about here, which is creating helpful Christian content on the internet for people who may be searching for it. And more and more people are searching for faith-related content, you know, searching why does God allow suffering, or why did Jesus have to come to earth? And so we created a website at Moody to help address some of those questions. And that's what I do for my day job. But a few years ago, I became very interested in like, what is social media doing to us? Like, what is it? How is it changing? I feel like social media is changing us more than we're shaping the world via social media. You know, ostensibly when these platforms were created, it was like connect with your friends and change the world through connecting with people on social media. And I really think that where these were tools that were ostensibly meant to serve us, we've really come to serve these platforms more than they serve us. And these platforms, I think, have really come to shape us more than we shape the world by using them. And so as I read more and read books and read studies and all things like that, I was like, you know, I really think that a lot of us love social media and know the good. But I think, unfortunately, we like to just kind of ignore the bad. I think we just don't think about the bad. And maybe because we don't know, or because we kind of know and we just don't want to think about it. And so this book, I wrote a book called Terms of Service, and the whole point is kind of a joke, as you can imagine, the title, Terms of Service. Nobody ever reads the Terms of Service. And I think that there's sort of a hidden terms of service when we sign up for these social media platforms beyond the ones that we lie about reading, that we've kind of indentured ourselves to these platforms in a way that we maybe don't realize. So that's kind of a little bit of background and how I got to even writing about and thinking about social media as a whole. So
very cool. Well, we definitely want to talk about your book, and as of this recording, it just came out, right? Just a few days ago.
Right. That's right. So, yeah, we're recording on Friday, February 4th. Yeah.
Yeah, so I haven't even had a chance to actually read through the book, but I've read a little about the book, and you use the term social internet rather than social media. What do you mean by that? Is there a difference?
Yeah, so I think it depends on how you think of the two terms. In one sense, there is a difference, and in another, there's not. It's just a broader way of thinking. So in the book, I use them kind of interchangeably because I understand that social internet may be a little foreign, if you will. But given that that kind of one of the key goals and purposes of the book is to get us to think more broadly about social media, I use the term sort of instructionally to try to get us to think more broadly about social media. So there are a couple ways I think about it, and the reason I use them differently. One, I think we need to recognize that the entire internet is social at this point. If anybody's been around for a while, the first iteration of the internet was called Web 1.0, or the Read era of the internet. That would have been in the early 90s to late 90s when everybody, large groups of people were using the internet. And it had become popularized, but nobody was creating content on the internet outside of big corporations, really. Unless you were sending emails, there was no such thing really as social media in the sense that we know it today. And so that is what was called the Read era of the internet. And then around 1999 or so, the first prehistoric social media platforms were being created, and it ushered in Web 2.0. AOL and AOL Instant Messenger and its chat rooms were kind of a big reason that whole era was ushered in. And that era was called the read-write era. I say was called. It's the era we're still in today. We're beginning to see glimmers of what Web 3 looks like, which has been called the read, write, and own era. And we're starting to see precursors of that percolate into the popular culture, if you will. But Web 2.0 is still very much here to stay. And in Web 2.0, the entire internet is social. So if I said social media, if we sat on this podcast for 30 minutes and talked about social media this and social media that, everybody would just think about a few apps and icons that litter their phone screens. They'd think about Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok or LinkedIn or whatever else.
Yes.
Everybody has their pet platform. And but I really think that we need to realize that, like, Amazon book reviews are social media. Yelp restaurant reviews are social media. When you Google what's the temperature of a medium rare steak and you get your response from Google search results, that was created by a human. That is social media. And I think we need to realize that social media, by definition, goes far beyond these platforms we commonly think of. And we can be shaped by those forms of social media as much as we're shaped by the apps that we think of. And so I want to broaden our understanding of what it means to engage with the internet beyond just social media. It's really all social. Secondly, the reason I think the distinction is important, and this is more of a technical term, and really I got this kind of from Neil Postman, the media ecologist who wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death back in 1985, which is one of the most transformative books of my life. It was written in 1985, and it could not be more relevant than it is today. And so he talks about the difference between a technology and a medium. A technology is like the actual ones and zeros, or binary, and the code and the science, if you will, the architecture. And so if you think about the social internet, that's a technology. That's like the architecture of the whole internet platform. It's the algorithms that decide what we see on Facebook feeds or TikTok feeds. It's the recommendation engine that YouTube uses to decide what to serve you next when you're watching YouTube videos, that sort of thing. That's the social internet, if you will. Social media, and as Postman describes, not talking about social media, but just talking about the difference between a technology and a medium or media is the culture you create on top of a technology. It's the way you use a technology to create culture. And so social media is the sort of culture we create using this technology of the social internet. And so the reason I like to make a distinction between the two is not only because I do think they're different and distinct in that way, but also because we regularly talk about how social media affects us, right? Like, should you watch that? Should you watch this? How does this video radicalize people or whatever? And we should be concerned sometimes about the content that we consume online and how much of it we consume. But I explore in the book, and I'm as much interested in how the technology, that architecture that undergirds all of this content, I'm interested in how Facebook algorithms are changing the way we think and how YouTube recommendation engines are changing the way we consume video content. And so I think we should be aware that the technology that serves us up those funny cat videos, the technology, not just the content, is changing us in some pretty significant ways. And so we explore that a little bit in the book without getting too much in the weeds. And so, that's why I think the terms are worth making distinct.
Very, very interesting. So another thing you talk about is one of your big sections of the book is you say there's 5 ways that social media has shaped us. So how do you see social media shaping us today? Now, I run social media platforms, and Christian Earth Unite is one of the platforms I run. I've actually have some other platforms that are larger than that, but every day I see fascinating discussions and fascinating arguments that I think never should have happened. But how do you see social media as shaping us today?
Yeah. So I think, let me say this, because a good bit of our conversation here today may sound like I hate social media. I don't. I really like social media. I really like social media. I think it's really good. I think, well, I don't think it's inherently good, but I think it can be really good and really helpful. And I've connected with I've made so many great acquaintances through social media. I mean, you and I connected in a sense through social media. And I've met, there are a handful of friends that I consider my friends 80% of our relationship is maintained by social media. We maybe only see each other a couple of times a year. And so I think social media is really valuable. Yeah. And I should say, like, I play video games, and this is a Christian Nerds podcast. It's a safe space to talk about this. Like, I play video games,
absolutely,
and connect with people on the internet and on the social internet more broadly, even beyond, again, those apps that we talk about. And so I think it's really valuable, and really there's a lot of good to be had. But like I said, I think a lot of us are pretty aware of the good and sometimes just ignore the bad. And like you, I mean, I've spent my entire career running social media platforms and leading strategy in social media. So I don't think it's irredeemable or outright terrible, but I do think that it's bent toward destruction and evil, and we have to intentionally use it well. We're not going to passively use social media for good, I don't think. I think we have to, I mean, just like life, you're bent towards sin. That's what the theology of original sin says. And so I think we need to try intentionally to use social media for good. So just a couple ways that I think social media is changing us and changing how we think and how we live. First, I think it leads us to believe that attention assigns value. So obviously on social media, the primary metric for determining whether or not your content is interesting is in engagement, likes, comments, shares, upvotes, whatever platform you're using. And so what can happen is, and there's been plenty of data to show this is the case, people come to believe that they are worthy or not worthy based on the level of engagement they get on social media platforms. If you're listening and you think that's silly, that's stupid, I understand. Like it sounds nonsensical and irrational, but when social media
live
starts
that way,
totally. So we can say like, oh, that's silly all we want, but we can poo-poo it or realize, oh, this is real, and how do we deal with it? And I think it is very real. And what's happened is a lot of folks social media has become the primary existence for a lot of people. And I really think some people don't realize that has happened, either to themselves or to people they love, where for many of us, one of my greatest concerns is the offline life has just become a sort of stage to farm content for the online life. And when online life becomes primary, which is the case for a lot of people, you're going to determine your identity and your worth and your value based on how much engagement you get on your content. And so that's one of the things I find most fascinating and concerning about like creator culture, like content creator culture online, is people can start to see their value based on how much engagement they get. So that's one way. Another way, this is probably the one that I'm most personally interested in and concerned about, but it's like doesn't have the most Christian angle, I guess you could say, but I wanted to include it in the book because I think it's really important and really valuable. Is I'm always shocked and concerned by how freely we trade our privacy for personal expression. Like I think Facebook is one of the most evil corporations on the planet, if I'm going to be honest. Meta, as we record this, they just lost over $200 billion of market value, the most by any company in one day in the history of the stock market. And you hear me playing my little violin very loudly over here. But like the way, and they're not the only ones, so I shouldn't. I mean, I should pick on them because they're the biggest, and I think they're the most egregious, and they have lied repeatedly about their harvesting of user data. But I think a lot of people simply don't realize how much they're giving up when they give up the personal information they give up to these platforms. And one of the most common rebuttals I hear to this is, why do I care if Facebook knows X about me? Why do I care if Instagram knows this about me? I don't have anything to hide. You may have heard this before. You may think this yourself if you're listening. And what I would say is like, that's fine. I would say it could be a slippery slope to some pretty scary stuff. However, I would also say this: if you think you don't care about privacy, don't shut the door the next time you go to the bathroom and see if you care about privacy then. Like, I think we all care about privacy to some extent, whether or not we think we do. And I think we should be aware of, like, I've heard some really terrible stories from personal friends of mine who have had their privacy violated because of stuff they freely posted on social media. And they feel like they've been the victim of a crime. But they haven't actually been the victim of a crime. They've just been a victim of oversharing on social media and getting bit for it. And so I think, like,
case in point, it took me all of 5 minutes after you and I connected to find out where you worked, what your wife's name is, what your daughter's name is. I know what your dog's name is,
Right.
and I know we have mutual friends.
Right.
It took all of 5 minutes because all of that
Right.
was publicly available because you
Right.
shared it.
That's right. And you know what you will never find? You won't find a picture of my daughter or a picture of a few other like parts of my life that I'm big on keeping the visual, hidden. And so like my wife and I made a pretty concerted, like a pretty intentional decision to not post pictures of our daughter on the internet when she was born a couple years ago. And, it's funny. I got to tell a story about that since we're talking about privacy. When we decided that, some people were like, wow, like, that's kind of weird. Like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, like we don't want to post pictures of our daughter online. Like we, not only because of the privacy stuff we've talked about, but like, I believe in the importance of individual digital autonomy. And when my daughter turns 8, I don't want her to look back on pictures we posted when she was 18 months old and be like embarrassed or, something like that. Like I think that kind of thing's important to me. And so
So that's a difference between you and I. My goal in life is to embarrass my daughters.
well, there you go. Perfect. So
Of course, they're all over 18 now. So
Sure. They've turned out fine. The thing that so anyway, we decided not to post any pictures, and I said to people, I said, think about this for a second. Like, if you think we're weird for not posting pictures of our baby on the internet, if you told parents in 2002, 2003, that in 10 years, 2013 and on, in 10 years, it's going to be totally normal for you to post pictures of your family and your tiny children, maybe even half clothed in the bathtub or something like that. That's going to be totally normal in 10 years. And if you don't do it, you're actually going to be kind of weird. Like, people are going to be like, you don't post pictures of your baby on the internet? Parents in 2002, 2003 would have looked at you like you were crazy. Like, are you kidding me? You mean it's going to be normal to post pictures of my babies on the internet? That, like, what kind of dystopian future is this? But now we're at 2022, only 20 years later, you're a weirdo if you don't do it. Yes. I'm concerned, like, what changed? Why has it suddenly become normal and okay to post pictures of small children on the internet? I know enough about the internet to know creepy stuff pictures do with small children on the internet. So I'm just super, super hesitant to just give up this sort of privacy and self-preservation just to express myself, just to post. People who need to see my daughter can see my daughter, for instance. This is just one example. I don't need to post it for all my Twitter followers to see, or all my Instagram followers, or whatever. And so anyway, those are just a couple things. There are plenty of others. I think we are led astray by false ideas. I think we destroy people who don't deserve being destroyed, but we just dislike them. But we decide we want to just destroy them anyway. So I think there are a handful of ways, like you said, 5 that I list, but those 2 are 2 of the ones I'm most passionate about. Those first 2.
I want to talk about this idea that you share in the introduction to your book. And it's the fish story. And this is an old story. This is I would call this an old preacher story, because I've heard this in sermons for years and years. But kind of give us the short version of the fish story and why you think it's important.
Yeah. So I first heard the fish story, and as far as I can tell, it's where it originated in popular culture. David Foster Wallace could have pulled it from somewhere else. In fact, he may even say that. But the fish story became popularized by American author and novelist David Foster Wallace in a 2003 commencement speech at Kenyon College. And it's later published in a book called This Is Water, which is just a book form of the commencement address. And he says, in kind of paraphrase, there are 2 young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the 2 young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What's water?" And the moral of this parable, if you will, is that the older fish knows what water is, and theoretically has been around long enough to say, "Hey, boys, how's the water?" theoretically as a greeting, but also with the understanding that perhaps the water could be bad, perhaps the water could be poisonous or toxic in some way. And the younger fish swim along and they just maybe, nod their head at this kind old man fish that they pass by. And then they go along further down and like, what the heck is water? Like, I don't understand what this water stuff is. And obviously fish live in water. They can't live outside of water. And the older fish has been around long enough to know that. The younger fish don't even realize they're swimming in water. And the reason I use that illustration at the beginning of the book, other than the fact that it's just wonderful and profound, is I think it's my attempt to pridefully be the older fish. This book, and really my desire in writing about the internet, is I've been around it for a while, really my whole life, as long as I can remember. I've seen the darkest corners of it, and I've tried to create encouraging, God-glorifying content on it. And my work in terms of service, the book, is my attempt to be the older fish and say, the water is toxic. The water in which we swim, which is the social internet, is toxic. And I truly think it is water to us being fish, because I never advocate in the book, I don't think, I don't intend to, that the answer to our social media problems is just to delete our accounts. That's never going to fix the problem. I talk to my 88-year-old grandmother every Sunday on the phone while I'm making dinner on Sunday night, and she's never used the internet in her life. And she will talk to me about stuff that her friends saw on Facebook that she talked about with them when they were over the weekend. And so my grandmother's never used the internet, and she can't escape social media. You and I will never be able to escape social media, even if we delete it off of our phones and never use it again. It'll be on the evening news. It'll be in the newspaper, whatever form of media you go to use, you will be inundated with social media content. So I don't want to give off this idea that just delete your account and go on a social media fast. Now, I think that can be helpful, especially if you find yourself addicted to it, or, finding your value or your identity in it in some way. I think those things can be helpful, but it's not an answer to the problem. Fish can't live outside water. We cannot live outside of social media at this point. It's a bell that cannot be unrung. And our only hope is to recognize this technology and the culture, media built on top of this technology, is inherently toxic. It is not a neutral tool. It is not a neutral platform. It's bent toward sin and frankly, just anti-human flourishing. And that's another point I make in the book. That's why I think that I don't think social media platforms are neutral, because how social media platforms flourish or make more money is antithetical to humans flourishing, because often the conduct that makes social media flourish monetarily is conduct that really drains on us, on our emotions and our health. But I think that it's important for us to recognize that the water's toxic and we cannot escape the water, and we just have to put our little fishy gas masks on and recognize that the water's toxic and live in the toxic water as best we can. And the book is my attempt to just say, hey, water's toxic. Put your mask on and prepare for what's to come. So,
yeah, you alluded to something just now that I probably explained to people in my social media groups and social media teaching when I teach on social media, on a weekly basis. Just explaining to people that, that post you saw that made you mad, that you commented on, what that did was it caused Facebook to go, oh, you commented on this, you must want to see more of it.
Yep.
So I constantly encourage people, if you don't like what you're seeing on social media, simply scroll on, and you'll eventually see less of it. If you see something you really love, engage with it intensely, and you will see more of it. But that's something that's hard to grab a hold of. People think that if they engage negatively, that will discourage that from happening more, when in reality, it's the opposite.
Yeah, it's almost like people assume these platforms have our best interest in mind, and they don't. And that's again, that's kind of the point of the book, is we use these platforms so passively, and we make assumptions about them and how they operate, and we don't realize that, using Facebook again as an example, Facebook's goal is simply to get us to engage and stay on the platform for as long as possible. They don't care if they make us happy or sad. And in fact, they have I'm not just being like a conspiracy theorist here. They have internal research that they published in 2018 that the Wall Street Journal, and they shelved this research, Facebook, and the Wall Street Journal revealed this research in early 2020, right around when the pandemic was starting, that Facebook recognized that the most engaged and most profitable content on their platform is conflict-oriented and makes people upset. And they didn't turn it down. They turned it up. So what people need to realize, if they're listening to this and they feel maybe like social media is making them unduly angry, is that's kind of the point. The point is not to make us feel good or get us in a better mental state. The point is to keep us engaged. And unfortunately, I think, again, because of like our human nature, sin nature, the way we stay most engaged with something is by being mad about it. And so, it's funny you mentioned the thing about
the mad emoji.
Yeah,
was for Facebook the most brilliant thing they ever did.
Yes.
For users, the absolute worst thing you could ever do. When you only had a thumbs up or nothing, you simply wouldn't thumbs up. Now that you've got a mad emoji, you can say you're mad about it.
Yeah, the amount of data that Facebook can gather simply from the different kinds of reactions they've created is incredible. And there's literally what people don't realize, there's literally a point system to those. Like if you engage with like a like, I'm using placeholders here for the points. If you engage with a like, it's like 1 point. If you engage with a heart, it's like 3 points. If you engage with an angry face, it's like 5 or 7 points. And what the points do is it signals to Facebook your interest in a piece of content, not how much you like a piece of content, but your interest in it, which is neutral, could be good or bad. And it's funny that you said what you said about the whole don't comment on something that you don't like and you won't see any more of it, because one of the funniest things that would happen when I was running social media at Lifeway is we would occasionally be running ads for Bibles or other Christian resources, and whoever would create the ads would accidentally not specify a Christian audience for the ads. And which is just like a rookie
I know
mistake,
what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say. And the same thing happened to me running ads.
Yeah, it's neither here nor there, but you get all kinds of F-bombs and don't get this stuff on my feed, and Facebook get this off my feed and all of that kind of stuff. And I just want to scream at the people commenting, stop commenting and you won't see it anymore. But anyway, so it's funny that you said that.
I did exactly the same thing. I ran an ad for Christian. Actually, it's worse because I think it's even more targeted. I ran an ad for Christian Nerds Unite, and I very specifically said I was looking for people who were nerds and people who were interested in Jesus. What I got was a lot of atheists.
Yeah, right.
Because they actively engage with Christian content.
That's right.
And they didn't understand that social media did to them exactly what they meant to do. And so my ad immediately went to tons and tons of atheists. And from that point on, I was very careful to realign my ads in very specific ways that I won't go into because it's entirely too technical.
Yeah,
but the minute I saw it, I thought, this is a brilliant story that I will use multiple times throughout my life.
Yeah.
And
this is one. That's the thing. That's for a social media strategy bit from us here is interest does not mean there's not a sentiment to interest when it comes to social media. If you ever see the term interest on social media, it just means interest. It does not mean positive interest, or it does not mean negative interest. It just means interest. And that's a lesson. If you learned anything today, you learned that, because we both learned it the hard way.
Exactly. Well, let me ask you kind of one last question.
Sure.
And I think this is kind of the opposite of your book. Maybe. And like I said, your book just launched and I haven't even had a chance to get a copy of it. So, so maybe you deal with this a little bit in the book. What do you feel like is the best worthwhile use of social media?
That's a really good question. And I've done, gosh, nearly 24 interviews for this book. And that question I don't think has been asked of me. What do I think is the best use? I think it really is kind of personal. I think there are a handful of best uses. Now, I think very broadly speaking, especially for Christians listening to this podcast, the best use as it is for any part of our life, the best use for social media is to glorify God using it. So whether you're commenting on a controversial piece of news, or you're engaging with a friend in a group like Christian Nerds Unite, or other such groups, like, I think trying to glorify God in our use of social media is broadly or maybe like should weave itself through every use of social media that we use. However we go about it. I think that wanting to glorify God and certainly not bring harm to the name of Christ should undergird everything we do. But specifically speaking, to kind of like get it out of the Jesus juke mindset, like get it out of the spiritual mindset, I think the best use is to use it however is best for you to flourish as a person. And what I mean by that is, like, how are you gifted? In what ways are you gifted? I think using social media to serve others is one of the best uses. So, like, I try to use social media through my day job to create helpful content for people who are at any stage of their walk with Christ, to find answers to their deepest faith questions. I think that's a good use of social media. I think another good use of social media is connecting with friends about how life is going. I think just, like chatting with people through whatever messenger platform you use, or through Twitter DMs, or I think another really great use, I love it when I see people doing this, like on Twitter, like if you use Twitter, like retweeting articles of people you think are really good writers, or podcasts of people you think are really good podcasters. I think sharing other people's work that you can recommend is a really great use. I also don't think being entertained is a bad use of social media. I'm a little bit ashamed to say that TikTok is my favorite social media platform right now, because it's kind of the spiritual successor to Vine, and Vine is my favorite social media platform of all time. And and sadly, it's been gone for a while, but TikTok is a sort of spiritual successor to that. And there are some, like, I love seeing the creativity of so many people on that platform, from people who are comedians to just really good video editors. I've come across some really fantastic musicians. And so I think, just from a consumer perspective, using social media to experience the giftings of others is a really great use. I think that's all very good. Now, I just think it's important for all of us to realize it's kind of like, I don't know anyone's particular views on like alcohol or other things, but like moderation is everything. Like you need to not be totally consumed by, like, watching 15 minutes of funny TikTok videos is much more healthy than watching 3 hours of TikTok videos, or whatever. Same goes for YouTube or whatever else. Like,
yes.
So I think moderation is key in all things, and especially social media. And just understand that if you use these platforms passively, you will start to use them negatively and even sinfully. So set time, screen time limits for yourself. Have friends who can hold you accountable. Like, say, if they see you acting a fool on Facebook, Facebook comment section of a local news program or something like that, they should be able to call you out and you not flip out on them if they call you out. So just have systems set up and things, whether it's things on your phone or just friends in real life who can be like, hey, I saw you being a jerk on Twitter the other day. Like, can you tell me about that? Like, why are you being a jerk, or whatever? I think that kind of thing is really important, but I do think there are some really great uses. Hopefully you can use it in one of the ways I listed.
Awesome. Well, Chris, it was great having you on the show today. Any last words for us before we go? Where can we find the book, and where can we find you? And I'll make sure I put all the links down below as well.
Yeah, sure. So you can find the book wherever you like to buy books. I think it's on Amazon, Christian Book, Lifeway, Barnes & Noble, all those places. You can find it. Looks like the Kindle version's around $10, physical version's sitting around 15, 16 or something like that. I also learned, actually, I didn't know this until the book published, because not every book gets an audio version. There is an Audible version on like the Audible service if you like listening to books. And I listened to it. They didn't let me do the voice part, but the person who did the voice did a very good job. I was like, wow, this guy's really good. So anyway, if you like listening to books, you can also listen to it, use one of your Audible credits there. And then I'm on my most prevalent social media platform that I use to connect with folks who I'm not personally friends or family with is Twitter, and I'm on Twitter at Chris Martin 17. I have a newsletter also called Terms of Service that I send out twice a week. Every Tuesday is like an original kind of column, if you will. And on Thursday, I share just 3 or 4 of my favorite reads from the week regarding social media and internet culture. So Tuesday is kind of an original piece that I write, usually 600 to 800 words, something like that. And then Thursday is like, hey, here's what I've been reading through the week and some stuff that I really recommend. And so that's the newsletter, which you can find in my Twitter profile. But if anyone's listening and has questions or wants to talk more about social media, I'm always up to chat with folks on Twitter at Chris Martin 17 is the best way. So
awesome. Well, we'll definitely connect with you there. And like I said, I'll put links to everything down below, including your book, Terms of Service, that just came out this week. Once again, Chris, absolutely loved having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
It was great having Chris on the show today. I believe deeply that the internet and social media are tools that we as believers must know and be able to effectively use. It can be a powerful tool to spread the gospel and encourage believers everywhere around the world. If you want to get a copy of Chris's book, Terms of Service, I'll put the link down in the show notes below. Well, that's all I have for us today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, just click all those buttons down below, whatever they happen to be, and so that you can keep up with the new content as we release it. And you can find all of our social links, links to our YouTube channel, and to our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. And while you're there, click on the support tab. We would love to have you as a Patreon. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from Ephesians 3. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. We'll see you next week. Blessings.